Rabbi Nancy Fuchs Kreimer is an associate professor of religious studies and the founding director of the Department of Multifaith Studies and Initiatives at the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, where she was ordained in 1982. She also holds a master's degree from Yale Divinity School and a doctorate from Temple University. With the support of the Henry Luce Foundation, Nancy has pioneered innovative community-based learning opportunities for rabbinical students and their peers of other faiths. Her projects include dialogue retreats for emerging Muslim and Jewish leaders, Cultivating Character, a conversation across communities, and Campus Chaplaincy for a Multifaith World. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hopenning. This is the place where hope happens when you open your mind and heart to it. I am here with a special guest, my friend, Rabbi Nancy Fuchs Kreimer, and she's coming to us from Philadelphia, a special weekend for Philadelphia, Nancy. It's Super Bowl weekend, but thank you for taking time out of your day to be with us.
It's a delight to be here, and I wouldn't be watching the Super Bowl anyway.
Well, Nancy, I'm with you on that because it's not my thing. It's such an honor to have you here, Nancy.
I love to be here. It's wonderful. Hope is important, especially now.
I agree. Nancy and I met in Northern Ireland, and little did I know at that time that she's famous. Nancy is famous in so many communities for the things that she does. And Nancy, at one point, the Hopenning did not want to talk about religion, and we didn't want to talk about controversial topics. We didn't want to rustle any feathers. But, I'm changing that because I think it's important, because sometimes religious topics need to have some hope, because I think there's a philosophy out there right now, and maybe for the past while, that all religion does is cause problems. So I'm here and you're here to prove that we can do things differently.
Absolutely.
So, Rabbi Nancy, I found out your history a tiny bit when we kind of roomed together at the retreat in Northern Ireland. But Nancy, how did you go from being a little Jewish girl, right, to have interfaith dialogues with Muslims and Christians and work so hard to make this happen for your whole career for 40 or more years?
Well, thank you. It's just lovely to see you again. Yes, we were in Northern Ireland, and I was there because I was interested in finding out more about the process of peace building in a situation very different from the one that I was used to thinking about, which was Israel-Palestine. And when I realized that what had happened in Northern Ireland over 30 years of violence, the Troubles, and how they had worked so hard to move beyond that, it occurred to me that there was much to be learned for us as Jews. And similarly, multi-faith is in my DNA. I grew up all Jewish. Both sides of my family were Jewish, but I've always been curious about what other people believe. And I've always felt that if someone knew something about God or about how to live a good life, I was all ears. And I very early on started hanging out with Christians in college and grad school, learning something about their religion. I didn't know very much about Islam because back in the day, I'm graduated college in 1974. So back in those days, we didn't really know much about Muslims in our country. Even in smart people like us I had a Ph.D. in religion, for goodness sake, when September 11th happened. And September 11th, 2001, I was already a doctorate in religion. I already taught at graduate school and at university. And I didn't know hardly anything about Islam or Muslims, but I had a steep learning curve because it was a bad time for Muslims in this country, in America, where there was a lot of pushback about, the terrorists and, what's wrong with their religion anyway, and it's a religion of violence. And I knew that couldn't be the whole truth, but I did want to know more. And I especially wanted to know Muslims. I could read all the books I wanted, but I didn't really know any Muslims. It was really kind of sad, actually. At my advanced age and part of my education, I was supposed to be interested in interfaith, which I was. I learned a lot with Christians. Anyway, so I began to learn and I began to meet people. And funny enough, I mean, those of you who live in Philadelphia will appreciate this story. I thought to myself, this was in '01, so it was before there was an internet, but I called the library, the central library, and I asked them where I could find some books about Islam. And they told me the Germantown Library would be good. Well, Germantown Library was 2 miles from my house, right? So I started driving down the street, and all of a sudden I noticed that the people on the street were wearing hijab. Some of the women were covered, their faces were covered. I was like, wow, what's going on here? No wonder they have a lot of books about Islam in that library. I lived 2 blocks away and I had no idea because my path through my life was to go in the other direction. I lived here. I used to take the road that way to get to work, to get to shopping, to get to my friends. When I started to take the road that way towards North Philadelphia and Germantown, away from where I lived, which was heading off towards the suburbs, I discovered a whole new world. So I made friends, I learned, I studied, and my life has never been the same. I've gotten so much out of it. It's changed my way of thinking about the world and about spirituality and also about the Middle East.
So what changed for you as you look at with a different set of eyes, right? You're still Jewish. That's your
Oh,
that's
yeah.
how you were raised. You still celebrate all the traditional everything. How did you see what's going on in Palestine differently, perhaps, maybe than other Jewish people? I'm not trying to stereotype anyone, but how do you see that from your
Well,
eyes?
let me back up. We're
Okay.
talking about 100-year struggle to figure out who is going to control that land, and it has not been decided yet. I mean, many Jews had hoped that in 1948, in the War of Independence, it had been decided that Jews would just control their piece of the land. And as it happens, nothing has been decided yet. At this moment in time, Israel, the country Israel, controls that entire region because in 1967, it won back in a war the West Bank and Gaza. And later they gave Gaza back, but then Gaza was ruled by Hamas, and Hamas wanted to destroy Israel. Anyway, the bottom line is Israel now controls the lives of 7 million Palestinian people who live between the river and the sea. That's how we talk about it there. 7 million Palestinian people. Well, do you know how many Jews there are in that area between the river and the sea? 7 million. It's equal. So
Oh,
it's not like a minority majority situation. It's the people in control are the Jews now because they have the government, the Israeli government. The Muslim people who are not all Muslim, some of them are Christian, but in Gaza, they're mostly Muslim. But I'm saying in the West Bank, maybe 15-20% are also Christian, but they're Palestinian people, they're Arabs. They would like their own control of their own lives, and understandably so. So the battle for who's going to run this place, whether it's going to be one state that's a democratic state for all people and there's no Jewish state anymore, or whether it's going to be two states, a Palestinian and an Israeli, Jewish and Israel Palestinian state side by side, or whether it's going to be some conglomeration, some federation. Nobody knows, but it is far from over. And this year has been the bloodiest, the most horrific, lots and lots of loss and destruction. Most of Gaza is in ruins. This is a part of this river to the sea situation that has 2 million Palestinians living in it, no Jews in that part. It's a strip right along the Mediterranean Sea, a beautiful, beautiful strip of land. 2 million Palestinians, their lives have been upended, their country, their hospitals, their universities destroyed, the place is in rubble. And almost 50,000 of them have been killed. So that's the situation there. The West Bank is not great for Palestinian people now because a lot of Jews have settled there in a kind of settler colonialism situation, but they don't have the same kind of rights as other people, the Jews have. So we call that the sort of apartheid situation. And then there's Israel proper, which is just a country with people in it, just like you and me. Some
Yeah.
of them are wonderful, loving. They're not racist. They didn't come to Israel to hate Palestinians and to destroy other people's land or to take away the rights of others. They came there because their grandparents
Homeland.
were thrown out of Europe or killed,
Yeah.
or great grandparents, depending on their age, right? And many of them also came from Muslim North African countries like Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco, where they also had to leave those countries. So they sort of say, hey, we don't have any other land to go to. America's not about to take 7 million Jews in. Palestinians are like, we don't have any other land to go to. So, what we're looking at is a situation where the only way to safety is going to be if they figure out how to make each other safe. And
And
this year has been horrific because Hamas's idea is, well, no, we'll just kill as many of the Jews as we can. And some of the Jews, unfortunately, in the government's idea was, well, let's just get rid of as many Palestinians as we can. And that's what's called, well, it's called a lot of things. I don't want to use all the right words or wrong words to describe it, but it's at least um, a lot of war crimes have happened in the
exactly,
last 15 months.
exactly.
And so those of us who are Jewish and who really are, we're not the only, I'm not the only Jew who feels this way. There's lots of Jews, especially in America,
Yeah.
but also in other countries and also in Israel proper, who say, this is not what we want. We don't want to win our freedom and our right to have a country on the backs of others. So that's the situation now. I know your podcast is about hope, so I'm supposed to tell you something hopeful. But right now, I'm not feeling the hope so much there.
Well, Nancy, I think what you just talked about there is why, why we can't rely on, I don't know if the word is government. I don't know if the
Yeah,
word, we
right,
can't, because if
right,
we want to learn about the human in each and every one of us,
right,
we need dialogue.
right,
We need to find out more than which church they go to or which kind of food they eat and don't eat and all of the rest of
right,
that, because that
right,
tells us nothing other than this is my culture, which got handed down to me. If I had been born of different parents, I would be different,
right.
right? It doesn't mean anything other than this is what was given to me through the ages. But it it I believe in God, you believe in God, Muslims believe in God. I mean, we just have a different route to get there. We just are choosing a different route for whatever reason.
So
And
that's what I'll say. When you talked about dialogue, that's what I'll say. That's where the hope lies in Israel proper and even in the West Bank. And now all over the United States, there are groups of Jews and Muslims who get together and talk to each other and learn about each other and work together. And there's a big solidarity movement now among Jews who believe that there ought to be a peaceful solution, and Palestinians who believe that. And this last year, I've been to multiple demonstrations and conferences, and all kinds of teach-ins, work, everything you can imagine, trying to learn. Well, not just to learn, I mean, to learn about Muslims for sure and Palestinians, but also to work together toward peaceful solutions. And I will say that now that we have Donald Trump as president, that is even more difficult than it ever was, because unfortunately, for the Palestinians and for the Jews who care about a safe future for all of us, Donald Trump doesn't. He doesn't care about any of that. So we are really facing a very, very, very tough time because Donald Trump's interested in himself and his own wackadoodle ideas about how to solve these problems. And like you say, we cannot rely on the governments. We have a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
And it is challenging. And I really do find that spirituality and religion help me have the motivation and the resources to continue this work.
Mm-hmm. And I was just thinking about that actually before we came on the show, because people question. It's like, Fran, why are you a Catholic? I mean, we've got such a bad history, right? I mean, Catholics have a terrible history, especially with Indigenous people in Canada. Oh, terrible. Why am I still Catholic? Why do I still participate in the celebrations and the
Yeah.
sacraments and all of that? And my answer is for me, because I find my spirituality often changes when I'm in the church. I have my spirituality. I totally do. I mean, of course I do. Otherwise, I wouldn't dialogue with people who are Jewish, people who are Muslim, people who are Buddhist, with even those ideas. I have to have spirituality inside of me to ask, to find out. I want to know more about you. I care about you, and I want to know why you care about this too.
I want to say, though, that it's something about the Catholics and the terrible history. All the traditions have terrible dark sides, shadow sides, not only to their history, but even to their texts. And what about the way that
Yes,
women have been treated in
yes,
Judaism and in Catholicism? If you want to look for some pure religious tradition, I was thinking about this the other day because I went to Costa Rica to a retreat with a Irish poet, actually, somebody by the name of David White. And he loves the Irish Catholic tradition also, and he brings it into his poetry, but he's not a believing Catholic or anything, but he does have that spiritual thing. And a lot of people who come to David White's retreats and come to his teachings, they're Catholic people who have left the church because they're so angry about the priest abuse. They're so angry about the fact that they can't be gay out in the church and other things, but they still have what we call it a God-shaped hole inside.
it's
And they're
beautiful.
still searching. And so he brings them into the Celtic tradition, where there's a lot of Celtic spirituality, which was the Irish faith before they had Christians on the land, on the island of Ireland. There were Celts, and they had their own worship and their own beliefs in nature. And I don't know too much about it, but I understand when I talk to these Irish people, American Irish people who are searching, I say, why don't you go back to the church and just check it out? Because I know that that's horrible, but all institutions are horrible. And you can go in and fight from within, like, like many of my friends, wonderful people who are Catholic and Protestant and
Yep.
various kinds of, and we all have our stuff. And what about me? I have to fight all the time about the Jewish tradition and some of the things that my people do now, which I obviously have no great love for, but it is mine and it is my tradition. And I feel like it's the home and the home base. So I'm very much with you, Fran, on this one.
Yeah. Thanks. Thanks for saying that. Because sometimes I feel like I'm not even an island in the middle of an ocean. I feel like I'm like on a rubber raft in the middle
Oh,
of
you
the
should
ocean.
come to my women that I go to protest with. Every Friday, I go with these Catholic people, women, to protest at the ICE office. You know what that is?
No.
It's ICE is immigration control. It's the place where they book people who don't have papers, and then they put them in trucks and they take them out to the airports and they deport them, or they put them to, now Trump says he's going to put them in Guantanamo. I mean,
Right.
anyway, it's horrible. But ICE is not our friend. Anyway, there's an office of ICE in Philly, and we go there every Friday with these sisters and with these Catholic priests who are
Yeah.
women. They were ordained irregularly, all out in the ocean somewhere by some priests who were themselves rogue, renegade priests, and they ordained these women. The women have their own congregations, but they don't meet in Catholic churches, of course. They meet in Protestant churches because the Catholic church hierarchy doesn't accept them. But I have been this prayer group. I have two women who are Catholic priests. A number of them are Catholic nuns, sisters who have spent their lives as medical mission sisters, delivering babies in the Congo or wherever. And I mean, these are wonderful, these are prayerful, pious people, and they want to protest what's going on to the friends, the immigrants, because it's not all immigrants he wants to kick out, just the brown ones. The white immigrants are fine. If you're an immigrant here from Sweden, you're fine. But he really wants to rid our country of people from the Latin American countries, of which there are a lot, many undocumented.
Yeah.
I mean, something like 14 million refugees in this country who he thinks that he's going to deport. It's horrific.
Yeah.
But I mean, anyway, point is that I do this protest work with Catholic sisters and priests, and I love them because they come with their rosaries and they're counting their rosaries, and it's great. Do you do rosary?
I do rosary. My rosary that I do personally is just a little bit not quite the same as the traditional rosary, but yeah, how could I not? I mean, my grandma used to do a rosary. She didn't understand the mass because she did not speak English. So she understood Latin, but when they changed it from a Latin mass to an
Mm.
English mass, she didn't understand it anymore. So what's she going to do? She was doing beads. She did her beads while the mass is on, and she went to mass every day. So, I mean, I've got that tradition,
That's
right?
beautiful. I didn't
And
know.
yeah, so
Yeah,
I mean,
but and when she did them, she would say, she would pray to Mary, our Mother of God, or
I think she did. Because that's the way I was taught by my mom, right?
how were you taught that? What do you say when you move the bead around? You
Yeah,
say
it was the Hail Mary,
Hail Mary.
the Hail
That's what
Mary,
they do. Hail Mary, full of grace.
which, and at the time when I was a kid, I just did it because that's what we did, right? I mean, it's just something we did, okay. But then I started to get into this phase where I questioned everything, and I had a bit of Pentecostal bent, right? And I was like so totally against Mary. And then I decided for Lent, because I'm still doing the Lent thing. It's 40 days before Easter. I decided for Lent I was going to go to church every day. I've said, you know what? I don't smoke, I don't drink, I don't eat candy. What am I going to give up? And I got the answer. You know, when you ask the question, you get the answer. And the answer was, well, Fran, try church. So I'm like, oh my God, do I have to go to church every day? And God said, nope, Fran, you do not have to do that. And I'm like, okay, so you want me to go to church every day? So I did. And it just so happened that before Mass every day, they were doing the rosary. And at first I rolled my eyes because it's like, oh, just get on with it. And then, you know how God works in your life. He's like, just humor me.
Right.
God is saying, just humor me, Fran. So I'm like, okay. So I started to do the beads, and then I started to actually say the words, and there was change. There was something that happened, Nancy. But I mean, there was power in there.
Words are Hail Mary, Mother of God, full of grace, be with us sinners, now and in the hour of our death. Is that
Amen. Yep. Basically, you got a couple of phrases mixed up, but that's basically it.
because I've
But
been hearing it every week now. They do
all
it.
right. I mean, there's so much unconditional love there from a mother to a child that you can start to understand the unconditional love of God. I hope to show my children that until the day I die, unconditional love. I understand who God is better.
And also to say the words, pray for us.
Yeah,
It's what's really powerful to me is saying the word, the hour of our death, over and over and over again. It's like really solidify into you. I am going to die. I am not going to be here forever. My days are numbered. And it's beautiful.
it is beautiful. And also there's a surrender to it.
How many of those decades would you do at a time?
Uh,
They call it a decade. That's
yeah,
10.
yeah, it's 10.
And they said, we're going to do 5 decades. Then they offered me to hand me a rosary. And I said, no, this is your practice. I really believe in the beauty and power of particularism and particular practices. So you do your thing. I don't have anything. But then when they asked me in between the decades, I did some Jewish prayers and I read a psalm and I gave a little homily. They seemed to like that. So I'm going to
Nice.
keep coming back because I need to pray. And we also need to have solidarity. So we carry a sign that says Interfaith Women in solidarity with our immigrant friends.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Because there's too many people carrying a different sign,
Oh, yeah.
a different one, and
Oh,
very outspoken about it. So tell me about when I was reading about you, Nancy, I read about your interfaith gatherings, but I also read an article that you had written, and this is several years ago, but it was called Rejecting the Chosenness in
oh, yeah.
Favor of Distinctiveness.
Right.
So that would have been in 2016 that you wrote that. Can we talk a little bit about that? Because I think that chosenness does harm, especially for certain people
This is
thinking.
not original with me in 2016. My movement is Reconstructionist
Yes.
Judaism, which has recently changed its name to Reconstructing Judaism. It changed
Okay.
it from a ist to an ing. It's now a present participle to reflect the idea that we didn't do it once and now we're done. It's that we're continuously reconstructing our faith. So, Reconstructing Judaism, the faith that I'm part of, is a small movement within Judaism. If your listeners know about Jews, there's Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, and Reconstructionist. They might
Okay.
not have heard of that one, or maybe they haven't heard of Reform and Conservative. In any case, you Orthodox, you get the idea what they are. In the United States, they only represent about 20% of the population. The rest of Jews are one of those other type, conservative, reform, reconstructionist, and now there's even a newer one called renewal. But we won't get into that. We'll digress. But back to Reconstructionism. Reconstructionism ist, whatever, founded itself in the 30s of this century, last century, 1930s, by a man named Mordecai Kaplan, who believed, among other things, that Judaism was not the chosen people. The Jews were not chosen by God. Judaism was a faith and it was a peoplehood, and it was something that people could and should identify with, but not because they were special, elevated. And one of the reasons he felt it was so important to eschew this idea, we call it supremacy, Jewish
Right.
supremacy, was that this was the time when Hitler was speaking about how the Aryan people were supreme over every other people. And he said, you know, that's just not okay. It's not okay for Aryans. It's not okay for Jews. We are all human beings, all equal. So he took the prayers, and in some of the prayers where you say chosen, he took that part out. And he said, instead of chosen, he said called. So when we go up to the Torah, instead of saying, I thank you, God, for choosing me above all other people, me meaning the Jews, I thank you, God, for calling us to your service. It's a different orientation. So the whole idea of chosenness went around fine for, for 2,000 years when the Jews had no country, no land. There wasn't, their supremacy could be in their heads. Nobody else thought they were supreme. It was actually made them feel a little good, considering that everybody else was just persecuting them. And it was a hard time to be Jewish when we didn't have a country. The Jews were exiled in 70 and didn't come back until 48. 1,900 years later.
Yes.
But in the interim, chosenness became a kind of a, okay, fine, you think you're chosen, whatever, like it makes you feel good. It makes you feel like you're special. We're suffering so much just because God loves us more, whatever. But once we had a country of our own to run with other people in it besides Jews, the idea that Jews would be chosen was really anathema. And most Jews don't get that. Most Jews still think, oh, chosen people, it's a good idea. But when I say to them, how would you feel as an American if Christians said, we're the chosen people, and this whole country is run with the idea that Christianity is the supreme religion, and everybody else can kind of fit in as they like? And some people say, well, it's kind of like that in a lot of ways. In some places, they do kind of make Christians sort of run the show. But technically speaking, according to the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, America is a country for all its citizens. And many of us believe that Israel should be like that too. It should be fair and equal to all its citizens, but it is not. It has special things that are just special for Jews. And it's very hard for Jews to give those things up. So one of them is that, well, the most important one, I would say, I mean, there's a lot of things that are sort of okay, like that we have a Hebrew language, that we have the flag is a Jewish flag, that we celebrate the Jewish holidays, that things are closed on Saturday, not on Sunday. That's all nice. It's culture. But what's not nice is that Jews, no matter where they're born, you could be born in Canada, wherever, if you're Jewish, you can walk back into Israel and become a citizen because it's a country for Jews, all Jews, regardless of whether they're born there. On the other hand, if you're a Palestinian who was actually literally born there, but has been exiled by the wars, either 48 or 67, and now you live somewhere else, you can't come back. So that's a very big injustice that we hold as an Reconstructionists consider this unfair because we don't believe that we should be a supremacist state. And we don't believe our faith should be a supremacist faith. Is that clear?
Oh my goodness, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
But just understand that the reason so many people who are Jewish don't agree with that is it's been such a long time since Jews have had any power whatsoever that it's very hard to adjust themselves to the idea that we are not so powerless anymore. And the more, I don't know if you've been following, but recently in America, anyway, I don't know about Canada, there's been rising up anti-Semitism in America. So these guys, that Trump let out of jail, the Proud Boys and the people who participated in trying to overturn the election in 2020, they are neo-Nazis.
Yeah.
And that scares Jews. And when Jews feel frightened about the fact that there are people running around free now because they were in jail, there are people who hate Jews, who hate Black people, there's a lot of people they hate, but they're not nice people. And Jews feel like a lot of them feel really scared of this moment. And it's hard for them not to then feel like, well, we want to be able to be in Israel if we want to be, if we need to be, because Israel is supposed to be a place where Jews can find refuge. And it's a very difficult situation. It's really hard. I understand why a lot of Jews are scared right now. And I understand why it's not just that, it's that Hamas did some terrible, terrible, terrible thing on October 7th. And they do hate Jews, and they do have a lot of anger and revenge. And not just Hamas, Al-Qaeda, all the Muslim terrorists. It's not a safe situation. So I understand why Jews are frightened. But I mean, my own faith tradition says that we shouldn't be having a country where we have different rights from other people.
But you are 20%, and 80% of people who belong to the Jewish faith think differently.
No, 20% are Orthodox. Then there's conservative, Reform, Reconstructionist. Among those, some of them think the way I just described, and some of them think, well, we still want Jews to have, and that's, but it's a small group. No, even among Orthodox, there are some Orthodox who are very liberal and left wing. They call them the halachic left, but they're left wing, but they're very tiny. And in the mainstream Jews who are not Orthodox, they're liberal. They don't follow all the rules. They have women rabbis, they have gay rabbis, they have all this other stuff. But many of them still feel that Jewish supremacy is important. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But I don't.
Yeah.
But that's why I wrote this article. It's not so popular a position even now, but it's a position that I'm not the only person that holds it. I mean, my whole little movement are 3% of the Jewish population. Okay? Jews represent 1% of Americans. So it's 3% of 1%. It's tiny, 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 tiny.
Tiny is right.
But you wouldn't know that from being in America where the Jews, quote unquote, control Hollywood or the media or the
finances.
And you would never in a million years guess that they're, a small percentage of the American population, that there are swaths of this huge country where people have never met a Jew or even know what Jews are, but Jews are everywhere in a very public way. Like we have a Senate with 100 people in it, right? 50 states, 2 each. 10 of the senators are Jewish. Wow. Now that's a huge percentage considering that only 1.5% of the population is Jewish, right? It should be like 1 senator, not 10. But that's the way it is because Jews have risen to all sorts of power, privilege. You hear about them all the time because they own the New York Times, for example. But it's not the case that we're so, well, actually, there are so many of us. And it's also not the case that we feel safe because we now have a president who we think is coddling up with Nazis. And we don't feel safe at all. Jews do not feel safe.
And I think that's why the movements like the interfaith gatherings are so important. To be publicly saying we are in this all together.
That's exactly right. We're in it together. Solidarity is only, we always say, if one of us isn't safe, if none of us are safe.
And that is the absolute truth. That's why we have to stand together. So tell me about the Sisterhood of Salaam and Shalom.
Oh, Salam. Okay, so that's an organization that was founded in 2010. I was on the founding board, and it's a wonderful organization. I love it. It's made up of women who are Muslim and women who are Jewish. And we get together in living rooms and we talk and learn about each other and we stand up for each other. If there's an incident of Islamophobia, that all of us stand up. If it's an incident of of anti-Semitism, we all stand up. That organization was chupping along, doing its thing, when the idea was that people met in living rooms and they really got to know each other on an intimate, deep level. So the pandemic was a big problem for the Sisterhood of Salaam Shalom because all of a sudden we weren't in living rooms. So we kind of fell apart a bit, but not, we still had an organization, but a lot of the chapters were frayed. And then came October 7th, 2023, with the attack on Israel by Hamas and the taking of the hostages. And then things got really frayed because a lot of the Jewish women, much as they like Muslims and they like everybody should be fair and equal in America, and if there's Islamophobia, we stand up for it, they weren't so crazy about being like pro-Palestinian in this moment. And similarly, the Muslim women who had grown to like their Jewish friends were feeling pretty raw about what was happening in Gaza and the vengeful way in which what we call it war crimes was happening on the part of Israel. So a lot of the chapters kind of fell apart over this disagreements because they didn't know how to talk to each other. But we have brave leadership. We have a fantastic woman who's in charge, a Muslim woman, Tahia Vikalo from Bosnia. She's a survivor of the siege of Sarajevo. And she and our president, who's a Jewish woman, Roberta Elliott, they sort of stepped forward and they said, we are not quitting. This organization has to bring together and stay together and talk to each other about the hard things, difficult though it may be. And we're having conferences and trips, and it's quite beautiful. So there's your hope.
Yeah, for sure. I watched this one YouTube video that talked about the sisterhood, and they were cooking. They were cooking meals to
Yeah,
take for homeless people,
yeah,
to be distributed
yeah,
for homeless
yeah,
people.
yeah.
And there was a comment made about that, about how when women are in the kitchen together, cooking and preparing food.
That was the whole concept of the sisterhood, doing
Yeah,
things like that together, especially like on Christmas Day when all the 95% of the people in the country who are Christian all want to be home with their families. That's a good time for Jewish and Muslim people to come and help out in the hospitals and, help out volunteering to do the jobs that Christian people don't want to do because they're home with their families. So yeah, that was great. That was all part of how we got to know each other and work together. What I'm sharing is that if this has been a difficult year and a half, this last year and a half has been tough.
yeah, yeah, I can imagine. Like, especially after so much work went into it. I think the lady mentioned that there were 160 chapters.
Yeah, but not anymore. There
No,
aren't that many chapters anymore.
unfortunately,
That's
you
what I
know,
was explaining to you. A lot of the chapters kind of fell into, just disuse because of the pandemic. And then the
right,
war came towards the tail end of the pandemic. So
right. Yeah,
there was yeah. But we are carrying on. We're taking a trip this summer. We're sponsoring a trip of Muslim and Jewish women to Bosnia to learn about the conflict there and how people, killed each other and genocide and everything until they stopped, and that's what we have to do. We have to keep going and learning, just like you and I were doing when we met in Ireland.
that's right. And I've been to Bosnia, and actually, out of that whole area,
You've been to Bosnia?
I have been, and I've been to Sarajevo, and I've dialogued with Muslim people. Every single Muslim family lost somebody to that war. Either they never came back and they don't know what happened to that person because their body was never found, or their bodies were found, but pieces were distributed. like the way the atrocities that happened in that war to the people of Sarajevo. I just, when I think about that, and I just am so sad, because I don't believe that would have happened if that hadn't been a mainly Muslim country. I don't think it would have happened if it was a Christian country. So yeah, I've been to Bosnia, and that's why I go to these places. Because I want to find out why people treat each other so badly because of us, because of religion. My gosh. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So yeah, which is a great segue. You've got a book that you wrote, Strangers, Neighbors, Friends, Muslim, Christian, and Jewish Reflections on Compassion and Peace. So tell me about the book. I haven't had a chance to read it, Nancy. I mean, like, what's your book
Actually,
about?
it's interesting. The book is co-authored with three people: myself, a rabbi, a minister, and a Muslim man. The Muslim man's name is Aziz Abu-Sarah. And at the time, the way that this thing was organized, Kelly Clark and Aziz and I each wrote separate chapters. So there's a whole 20 chapters by me, 20 short chapters, 20 chapters by Aziz, 20 chapters by Kelly. And that's it. And it would have been a better book if we had had conversation and back and forth, but that's not what the book is. Anyway, book is what it is. The important point is Aziz is a really interesting guy because he's a Palestinian who grew up in East Jerusalem, and he's one of many young Palestinian people who lost a sibling to the violence because the father, I'm sorry, the Israeli soldiers killed, they tortured and killed his brother because they thought he was some kind of terrorist, which he wasn't. And this happened to many, many people. It's a common story. But unlike many people, or like some, he decided, look, I'm never going to get ahead if I just spend my time being angry. So he joined something called the Bereaved Families for Peace Circle. And he helped found it, actually. He's actually the executive director of it for a number of years. They changed the name to Parents Circle or something like that, but it's actually not just parents, it's siblings, anybody who's been bereaved from both sides. And they have an organization that works for peace, and it's a fantastic organization, and you can watch videos of that organization. So come October 7th, 2023, Aziz became quite the national celebrity, at least here in the United States where he lives, because he started going around with this Israeli guy whose parents were murdered on October 7th. So Aziz lost his brother to violence by the Israeli Defense Force. This friend of his, whose name I don't remember right now, Israeli guy, the two of them started to lecture all around the country. They made videos and YouTubes and movies, and there's a whole film about them. And they went to see the Pope. I'll send you the video if you want of them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
The Pope.
yeah.
So this is more, so Aziz is a much more interesting and important story right now than Rabbi Nancy, with all due respect, but he's in the book too. And the story that, I think over and over again is these people are saying, if we can talk to each other,
Right.
anyone can.
That's right. Because this is personal now. I mean,
And we're still willing to do it.
yes,
So you should too.
yes, that's beautiful. Like, that is a testament in itself of what humans can do if they put their mind to it, regardless of circumstances, regardless of hurts, right?
Right.
Wounding, regardless of just I I'm not alone. This hasn't just happened to me. It happens to somebody that I'm not supposed to care about. It happened to them too. and
That's
and double.
That's exactly right. And it's more than that too. It's like once you just live with all that anger, how is that working for you? Not very well. The
Yeah.
revenge and anger and bitterness, it's not really serving anybody very well these days.
Yeah.
So he's really a good guy to keep your eye out for. And there's a lot of films and other kinds of things around of people in Israel and in Palestine who get together, work together for peace. And that is really the inspiration. I mean, what I did in America, in Philadelphia, is not, I mean, it's lovely and everything, but honestly, I mean, I live in the city where it's possible to do that. And at least until now, the government was supportive of us. In fact, I did a lot of my work by raising grants and money from foundations and from, even the National Endowment of the Humanities.
Right.
I think we're entering an era now where this kind of work, at least in our country, is going to be more challenging.
And interesting and creative. I think I think the fact that we have to become more creative will give us some kind of a different strength. Maybe like I talked about before, just surrendering, right? Okay, I'm kind of out of ideas here. God, give me some new creative ideas. And my belief is all we need to do is ask, because God's got a plan that's bigger and greater than ours is. And he wants all of us to get along. His children, right? I think of God, doesn't matter what color you are, or where you came from, we're all his children. And any parent just wants their kids to get along, right? That's when you're happiest. So we're almost to the end of our time. Oh, I could have so many more questions I could ask you, Nancy. But I want to talk about how you now have grandchildren who are being raised into faiths. Let's spend some little bit of time with
Okay, let me
that.
be clear about that. So there's faith and there's heritage. They are being raised in the Catholic faith with Jewish heritage. So they know that their mother is Jewish and they know that they have Jewish blood and Jewish um, ancestry, and their grandparents are Jewish, their grandmother's a rabbi. And I'm glad you asked this question because it's going to allow me to talk about something I really want to talk about, which is their faith that they're being raised in is Catholic. They're going to Catholic school, parochial school, and they go to church. So my daughter made the decision that rather than get them all confused at the early stage with like, here's everything, they would pick one faith, and her husband really wanted the Catholic faith, and she said okay. And then they would also bring in the tradition and the heritage, the ethnicity as a second part. And some people do the opposite. They bring the kids to church, to synagogue, and they give them the Jewish faith, but then they say, look, your grandpas and your grandma, your mother, they're Irish Catholic, so you have the Irish tradition, and they bring in that part of it. So it's just a choice. But in America, there's all kinds of kids. There are kids being raised with none, two, three, one, two, all sorts of things. So I'm writing a children's book that I wrote for my grandchildren, and now I'm trying to get it published about my grandchildren asking their nana, that's me, how was the world created? And then in the book, the children are wondering, how did this world get here, right? And we go through all the different ideas that are out there in their own community. They ask the father has a friend who's a Capuchin monk, and he tells them about Saint Francis and his canticle, and about how, the wind and the sun and the stars and the moon are brothers and sisters, and it goes on and on. You can get the idea. And we have a Hindu woman who's a yoga teacher in the community, and she tells about how Lord Vishnu and Lord Brahma got together and they took a lotus plant and they, separated the leaves, and out of the leaves came the the earth and the sky and the sun and the moon. Anyway, it is really a fun book because you learn a lot about all the different traditions. And then the kids say at the end, but Nana, don't you wish we knew what really happened? And Nana's, no, I'm glad we don't know what really happened because then we can learn from each other about what's really important because these stories are not telling us what really happened.
Right.
These stories are telling us, like the Pope says, what's important, what is important about our relationship to God, to the earth, and to each other. That's what's important about these stories, because the stories actually don't tell us what really happened. We don't actually know what really happened. I have a scientist in there too with the Big Bang
Oh,
and
yeah, yeah,
the
yeah. I can't wait. So
so
what age level is this for?
5 to 8.
Oh my goodness, Nancy,
And I have to tell you that the illustrations are gorgeous.
I
The
bet.
illustrations are so beautiful.
Oh my goodness.
You allow me to share.
I will give you sharing privileges. I will do that right now.
So this is one that I'm just going to show you the illustration of one because I have an artist who does the most beautiful work. Her work is done with collage.
Oh, really?
Okay. You know what collage, have you ever seen a
Yes.
children's book with collage?
Yes.
Um, Each
Oh,
one is a collage of that particular. This is the story from the Hindu tradition.
yeah. Oh my goodness, Nancy. I can't wait till it comes out. It
Yeah.
will totally come out. I know it will. Awesome. So that's perfect. So when do you think it'll get the go
I
ahead
don't
to
have
get
a
published?
publisher yet. We don't
Ah,
have a publisher yet. We have to find a publisher.
yeah. Well, that's what I can pray for you, Nancy.
Thank you.
You're
Thank you.
welcome.
It was lovely to meet to see you.
Oh, I know. And what I always do is I always ask our guests if you have one last bit of hope for our viewers.
Well, the hope that I think I've been sharing all along is all the people of goodwill who are trying so hard to hear each other and who know, just like Fran said over and over again, none of us are going to be safe unless we're all safe and we have to stick together. That's the hope that we are, and that we get fed by our traditions and by our faith to give us the strength to work, to do the work that we need to do. That is the hope.
Yeah, that
Children,
so
children,
true.
children are full of wonder at the
Yeah,
beauty of the world and asking questions. And yeah.
yeah. So,
Okay, it was great
yeah,
seeing
it
you.
was wonderful to see you too,
Thank
Nancy.
you. I hope you
Yeah.
enjoyed it. I did.
I do, and I'm sure that our viewers will too. And so, if you have just tuned in for the very first time, please subscribe. It will help to get the message of hope out there. That there's different ways are possible, and there are good things going on in the world, even though sometimes it seems really dark. And if you're a longtime viewer, thank you for being here. I'm on a different platform now, so please subscribe here, and then you'll get all the new Hopenning episodes that come out. I wish you all well, and thanks for being here with Nancy and me. And thank you, Nancy, for coming. It's a
Thank you,
pleasure to
Fran.
see you. Yeah,
Thank you.
I'll see you in front of the ICE building.
Check it out on Facebook. I have a picture of me and the Catholic ladies up there.
Yeah, I will.
Thank
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
This podcast and inspired healing hypnotherapy do not provide medical advice. The information included here is not limited to text, graphics, images, or other material contained, and are for informational purposes only. No material in this podcast is intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or treatment, and before undertaking a new healthcare regimen. And never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this site.